Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Pfaff Ambition 620. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started on sewing with this machine. So basically, you want to be able to sew a straight stitch and a zigzag, right? There's a lot more that you can do with this machine, but straight stitch and zigzag are kind of foundational. Okay, to start out with, when you turn on your machine, this is the screen you're going to get. Now, you can fill this in with information by pushing the I button, and that tells you with that particular stitch, it's going to recommend this foot, the OA foot, which is your standard, everyday, all-purpose foot. And it's going to recommend that you use your IDT, which is this little guy here. I'm going to engage him right now. This shows you your thread tension. This is the needle position, which happens to be right there in the center. And in the case of a zigzag, if I chose zigzag, let's go with 4. Okay, that's your zigzag. I can make that zigzag wider or narrower, and it shows that right in the picture. Now, if you want to make it really narrow, you can just press and hold until you get it to where you want it to be. In the case of doing like applique, you may want to have it much shorter. You can shorten your stitch length right down like that. Now, there is a better stitch for doing applique, and that's number 6 up here. So I'm going to push number 6 and see how nice and close together those stitches are. You can even make them a little bit closer together if you wanted to. So that's the advantage of choosing 6 rather than 4 or 5. You can also narrow this using this button here and get it to where you want it to be as far as according to your thread. Now, you don't want this too short, because if it's too short, it's just going to get caught and stitched in one place. You want to have a nice applique that covers the edges of your fabric. Okay, and it also tells you which foot to use. That's the 2A foot. And in this case, you would not want to use your IDT, your walking foot. And I think that's because whenever you have a satin stitch, you don't want your walking foot to be scratching across that satin stitch and maybe roughing up the nice silky thread that you've got. Okay, let's go back to stitch number 1 right here. Now, I can move my needle to one side or the other if I wanted to. Watch the needle down here as I move it to one side. I can press and hold, and it will just step right over to where it needs to be. When it gives that little beep beep, that means it's come to the limit of what it's going to do. I can also make this a shorter or longer stitch length. If I'm basting or something, I can just press that and hold that to get right up to the longest stitch length. Now, to get it back into the default for that stitch, just reselect the stitch. It puts it right back into default. A lot fewer button pushes than just having to step it across. Also, notice when it's not in default, it's going to give you light colored numbers on a dark background. When it's in default, it gives you dark colored numerals on a light background. Okay, so to do our zigzag or regular sewing, let's just get this started here. What you want to do is put your fabric under the foot. Make sure you're not sewing off the edge of the fabric, because you don't want your threads to tangle. So lower the presser foot. I like to hang on to the thread a little bit when I get started. And I push on the foot control. Now, you may want to slow this down. This is your speed slider. It's going to govern how fast you go. So if you're just getting used to this machine, this is a great tool to have. And that way, if you press on that foot control, it's not going to zoom ahead. Now, if I wanted to do a back stitch at the end of this, most people would stop, press this, hold this, and do their back stitch. But notice, this little light came on. It's going to keep back stitching. That means when I do a back stitch here, to turn that off, I just push this again. If I'm going to do a back stitch, I need to be doing it as the machine is sewing. I'm going to show you this again. So I'm going to go forward while it's sewing, push this back, let it up, and see, I never took my foot off the foot control for that. So Pfaff is a little different that way. You need to make sure your machine is in motion when you use this stitch here. And you can do that at the beginning of your sewing too. Just make sure you get started and you're in the process of sewing when you push the back stitch button. You have another option, which is this little tie-off button. It works kind of in a two-step way. So you'd push this here, and then you're going to be pushing your back stitch button. It's going to give you a little back and forth stitch. Lift up your foot, and then get started. And wherever it is where you want to stop, you can push this again, push this, and it gives you that little back stitch. Back and forth stitch. It just moves the feed dogs a little bit so that it's not just sewing in one place, it's actually moving it a little bit. Now another really neat feature is you can push this button. This cuts your thread and brings the thread tails to the back like that. Nice and neat, isn't that? Okay. So for changing your thread tension, you need to get into settings to do that, and I'll show you in my settings video. There's not a little dial up here to do that, but there is a way to change your thread tension in the settings. But most of the time you just want to leave it right there at default. Okay, so let's get into zigzag a little bit. So we have several different zigzags. I showed you the number 6 up here. Number 4, when I push number 4, that's going to give you the kind of zigzag that you can widen and narrow from the center. So it widens and narrows from the center out. Number 5 is really nice for doing the edges of fabric because it stays the same on the right, but it widens or narrows to the left. So that way you don't have to keep repositioning your fabric all the time. You can just leave it right where it is. It's great for doing like the edges of denim, or anything that's more loosely woven. You want to have a wider zigzag to take more of a bite into the fabric so it doesn't fray. Now, one of the problems with doing zigzag on the edge of your fabric is it tends to kind of scrunch up your fabric, especially lightweight fabric like your quilting cotton. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. Now, when you're zigzagging the edge of the fabric, that's it, to keep it from continuing to fray, you want to make sure your right hand needle swing goes off the edge of your fabric and your left hand needle swing goes into the fabric. So I'm going to just go along like that for a few stitches, and then of course I can do a back stitch to kind of tie that off if I want to. And instead of doing the cutter, this time I'm going to just lift it out and cut it off to the side here. So, well, notice what happens is that edge gets kind of scrunched up. That's a very typical thing, and I've kind of dealt with this all along. There is a fix, and you have it in your accessory kit. That's this little foot right here. This is going to help you to get a nice, flat, smooth zigzag, and I'm going to show you that. So to take off the foot, press down on the front, hold the foot off to the side. I'm going to put that right down there in the accessory tray so it's safely out of the way. This is your number 3 foot. Now, this is the foot you would use if you were going to do a blind hem, but it's also a good foot to use when you're doing a zigzag. Now, you want to make sure you use the number 5 zigzag, not the number 4. The number 4, if you don't have it set just right, that little wire there could be struck by the needle. So the number 5 zigzag is the one you want. Let's put this guy on here, like that, and we've got that set up. Now, to make sure, anytime you have a foot that doesn't have a nice, clear, wide zigzag in it, if it's just a single hole or whatever, always make sure the needle's not going to hit the foot or any part of the foot before you get started. That's when you use this hand wheel over here. Okay, so what I've done, actually I didn't show you this well enough. This little red thing here is a guide. That's what you would guide the edge of your fabric along. And you can move this back and forth. Again, it has to do with the kind of fabric, the thickness of the fabric that you're using for doing a blind hem. But for our purposes, we want to line the edge of that red right with that little wire that the needle's going to be jumping back and forth across to do a zigzag. Let's put this on here, lift this up, there we go, back down on there. Okay, and then we put always have your thread under the foot. That way it flows smoothly. Okay, I'm going to line the edge of my somewhat frayed fabric right there, and notice I'm taking one stitch this way, one stitch this way. Yes, it's clearing that little wire just really nicely. Now I have widened this zigzag from default. Default number 5 is about like that. That, to me, it's kind of preference, but to me, I like to have a little bit wider zigzag when I am sealing the edges of my woven fabric, because I want it to last through lots and lots of washes without it fraying at the edge. So I like to have that a little bit wider. So I'm going to go up there to about, I'll say 5. Okay, now to get started, let's put a little bit of a back stitch, but I am going to get started sewing first, then a little bit of a back stitch, not too much of a back stitch, because there's that wire in the way, and I'll kind of explain that at the end. So we're going to go down here. Where I'm watching is right here, the edge of the fabric to that guide. That's what I want to keep, so it's right up to the guide there. I'm going a little bit slower just so I can show you what I'm doing, and then again, start sewing, a little bit of a back stitch right there. And you notice that light's not on. Okay, now when you take your fabric out of here, that zigzag has actually formed on that wire. So to get it off, don't just pull it to the side, pull it straight back, and it comes right off. Okay, see how much slack there is in there? That's a good thing, because that's letting the edge of the fabric lay nice and flat. Here it's kind of scrunched it up because there was nothing to put the slack into that top thread. That's what this foot does, and that's going to be your friend as far as sealing the edges of your fabric, zigzagging the edges of your fabric. You don't really need to use this when you have a thick, lofty, stiff fabric like denim. You need it more with your linings and your quilting cottons and things like that. Okay, so that is zigzag. I'm going to take that back off of there, put the foot back on, and put that under there like that. Lift up the presser foot a little bit. Always make sure that your numbers on your feet are right side up. It is possible to put your foot on backwards, but you don't want to be doing that and trying to stitch through this. That hole there is for your IDT to go into. There are some feet that come with your accessories that do not have that hole there, but when you see that, if it's facing towards you, don't start sewing. Take that foot back off, turn it around. Make sure that you can see your 3 or your 5 or your 1 right side up. Make sure that, believe me, I've done it wrong, so I'm giving you the benefit of my experience here. Okay, so that's your basic zigzag and straight stitch, and there are more explanations in the book, but hopefully this has gotten you started. If you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. If this has been a helpful video, give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. We have lots of other videos, so stay tuned. See you later. Bye.